So the source material today. When I first saw the title, I have to admit, I thought we were in for a pretty grim history lesson.
I can see why.
We're looking at the subtle art of printing under pressure, specifically the chapter How Resistance Learned to Survive. And, you know, based on that, I was expecting a story of smashed printing presses, jailed writers, just silence.
Yeah, that's the usual narrative, isn't it? When authority tightens its grip, more licenses, banning books, we usually talk about what gets destroyed.
Exactly. But that's not what this text is doing at all. And that's why I wanted to do this deep dive. The author makes this really counterintuitive argument right at the start. They claim that strict censorship didn't actually kill the printing industry.
It made it smarter.
It made it smarter, it made it higher quality, which sounds, well, it sounds wrong, doesn't it? Like an apology for authoritarianism.
I get that, but I think you have to look at the mechanism they're describing. The core thesis isn't that control is good, but that control acts as a filter. The line that really stood out to me was, control did not end printing, it reshaped it.
It's an evolutionary argument.
Precisely. The environment gets hostile, so the organism, in this case, the printing culture, it doesn't just die, it evolves.
So we aren't talking about, open revolution or storming the barricades.
No, and that's really the mission for us here. We're trying to find the mechanics of what the source calls quiet persistence. It's almost like a technical manual on how to disappear while still making noise.
Let's get into the gears of it then, because reshaping is a nice idea, but I'm looking at the section on the printers, and the logistics sound like a nightmare. It says printers shifted to moving workshops quietly.
Right.
Now, hold on. Have you ever seen an old-school printing press?
I have. They are absolute monsters.
We're talking cast iron, hundreds of pounds of lead type. You don't just throw that in a backpack when you hear a knock on the door. So what does moving workshops even mean?
Well, this is where the ingenuity comes in. The source details a shift in how presses were actually built. They moved away from those huge monolithic presses you'd see on Main Street to something they called modular frames.
It's like IKEA furniture?
A bit more robust, I hope, but the principle's the same. Instead of one solid piece, it was held together with specific joinery, so you could knock it down in under an hour. They were trading durability for mobility.
So if a raid was rumored, they could just break the shop down, load it onto a cart, and be gone.
Or just move it from the cellar to the attic. Mobility became the key survival trait. If you were stationary, you were a target. If you could move, you were a ghost.
But that creates a huge economic problem. I'm looking at the volume and visibility section. In manufacturing, you make money on volume. You run 5,000 copies. But this source says they shifted to smaller batches.
Right.
So if I'm a printer and I'm only printing, say, 50 copies because I'm scared, aren't I just driving myself out of business?
You would be if you were selling on the open market. But the business model had to shift with the technology. They weren't printing for the masses on a street corner anymore. They were basically printing on commission.
A subscription model.
More like a patronage model or a high-risk premium. The small batches were a risk management strategy. I mean, think about the inventory. If you print 5,000 banned books, where do you put them? You need a warehouse.
And a warehouse is a giant flag saying, "Come arrest me."
It's a massive liability. But if you print 50, you can distribute those in a single night. You clear the inventory immediately. The source calls it printing to order. No stock, no evidence.
There's a detail here I loved about the physical size of the books, the coat pocket standard.
Yes, the duodecimo format.
It's just such a perfect example of the environment shaping the product. Printers stopped making those big, beautiful folio editions.
The ones for a lectern.
Right. And they started cutting paper to fold down into these tiny, dense little books.
It was purely functional. The source says the dimensions were dictated by the tailoring of the day. A gentleman's overcoat had pockets of a certain size. The book had to fit inside that space, completely invisible.
So the fashion of the era literally dictated the aspect ratio of its literature.
Exactly. You couldn't just walk around carrying a rebellious text under your arm. It had to become part of you.
That changes everything about the act of reading, doesn't it? It makes the book feel like, well, contraband, which I guess it was.
It was.
But let's pivot to the content, because the press can be mobile and the book can be tiny, but if the words on the page get you executed, none of that matters. The source says they chose words more carefully. Now, when I hear that, I immediately think self-censorship. I hear writers watering down their arguments to stay out of trouble. Is that what's happening here?
You could read it that way, but the source argues it's the opposite. It calls this the subtlety of language. not as a surrender, but as a weapon.
Yeah.
It's not about saying less, it's about saying it differently.
Okay, so give me an example. How do you code a revolution?
Well, the text mentions the use of allegory. So instead of attacking a specific king by name, which gets you arrested, you write a treatise on gardening. You talk about the invasive weeds that are choking the healthy flowers.
And everyone knows the weeds are the politicians.
Precisely. The minister reading it knows he's the weeds. But legally, it's very hard to prosecute someone for a book about gardening. It creates this layer of plausible deniability.
It's a cat and mouse game.
It is. But it forces the writer to be incredibly clever. You can't just rant. And the source argues this pressure actually improved the literary quality of the time. It forced nuance.
Control creates pressure, but also ingenuity. That's the line.
That's the one.
It makes me think of how restrictions in film, like not being able to show the monster, often makes the movie scarier.
That's a great parallel, because you have to engage the audience's imagination. Which brings us to the other side of this. We've talked about the printers and writers, but a book is useless if no one reads it.
And the section on the mechanics of consumption says, readers adapted to.
Right. This is where the social aspect becomes critical.
We talked about the coat pocket standard, so we know people are carrying these things around in secret. But where do you actually read them? You can't just pull out your gardening manual about overthrowing the government in a pub.
No. And this is where we see the privatization of information. The source describes a retreat from public reading, which used to be really common, into private spaces.
What does that actually look like? Just hiding in your room?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
But it's more about the architecture of trust. The text explains how reading became a vetting process.
Vetting? How so?
Well, think about it. If I hand you this book, I am handing you evidence of a crime. I'm literally putting my life in your hands. So the act of sharing a book became the supreme act of trust.
It transforms the book from just a product into, I don't know, a secret handshake.
A test of loyalty. And that's why the distribution network was so hard for authorities to break. It wasn't a commercial chain. It was a chain of friends, family, trusted associates. To break the network, you had to break those bonds.
Which is much harder for a government to do than just smashing a press.
So much harder. You can smash iron. It's very hard to smash a friendship.
There's a phrase here that I think just nails it, meaning traveled through conversation, not proclamation.
That is the crucial pivot.
So what does that really mean? Because a book is a proclamation, isn't it?
In a free society, yes. You publish, you broadcast. But in a suppressed society, the book is just the spark. The real work happens in the conversation after. We both read the gardening manual, and then we sit in a quiet room and whisper about what the weeds really mean.
The oral network sustains the written word.
The source implies it was actually more robust. The book might get burned, but the idea has already jumped from the page into our minds, and now we're spreading it. The book is just the vector.
This brings us to the philosophy of it all, this idea of quiet persistence. And I have to play devil's advocate again. We're describing people hiding in basements, writing in code, whispering in parlors. Is this really resistance, or is it just hiding?
That's the central question, and the author draws a hard line between open defiance and quiet persistence. We're conditioned to think resistance looks like a man standing in front of a tank.
Right, heroic martyrdom.
But the source argues that in this context, martyrdom is strategically useless. If you stand up and shout, you're arrested, your press is burned, your network is exposed, you've achieved nothing but your own silence.
So quiet persistence is the long game.
It's the only game that ensures survival. The source uses this phrase, living alongside authority. You don't try to occupy the same space as power. You find the spaces they aren't looking. You find the cracks.
The biological analogy again, camouflage.
Exactly. Resistance survived by becoming subtle. It's not cowardice, it's adaptation. The goal of the printer isn't to be a hero, it's to keep printing. The goal is to make sure the idea survives. Invisibility isn't weakness, it's discipline.
That's a really strong point. It takes more discipline to whisper for 10 years than to shout for 10 minutes.
And it's so much harder to fight. How does an authority fight something it can't see? A movement with no headquarters, no leaders, that just looks like a bunch of people reading about gardening.
You can't. You're just swinging at mist.
You operate in the blind spots?
So let's bring this all together. We started with this idea of the walls closing in. But what this source suggests is that when the walls close in, people just start digging tunnels.
That's a perfect way to put it.
We saw the logistical shift to modular presses, the physical shift to the coat pocket standard, the linguistic shift to coded metaphors.
And the social shift, from public squares to private parlors, building networks on trust, not broadcast.
And the philosophy under all of it is this quiet persistence. The idea that just surviving is a form of victory.
And the big takeaway here, the so what, is really about the resilience of information. The source is telling us you can't actually stop the flow of ideas. You can make it harder, you can force it underground, you can make it change shape, but you can't stop it.
The pressure just forces the water to find a new crack in the dam.
And it often refines it. It strips away all the noise and leaves only the most essential, potent ideas.
The source does end with a bit of a look ahead, though. It implies this is just phase one.
Right. It says this phase was about survival, but the next phase moves beyond regulation to shaping belief, faith, and personal interpretation.
That sounds like the stakes are getting even higher.
They are. Once you've built this underground network of trust, what do you put through it? You stop talking about politics and start talking about the soul. And that is far more dangerous to authority.
It's one thing to smuggle a book. It's another to smuggle a worldview.
Precisely. And that's where the history goes next.
We'll have to save that for another deep dive. But to wrap up, I want to leave everyone with a thought about this idea of visibility. We live in an age where everything is visible. If you resist, you live stream it. We equate being seen with taking action.
We do.
But this source says the most effective resistance is the kind you never even hear about until it's already won. So it makes me wonder, if resistance works best when it's quiet and camouflaged, how much of it is happening right now?
That is the uncomfortable question, isn't it?
What are the moving workshops of today? What are the coded conversations that we and the powers that be are completely missing just because they've adapted perfectly to be invisible?
If this history holds true, the most important changes are probably the ones we can't see yet.
Just because you don't hear the printing press doesn't mean it isn't running.
Ugh.
Thanks for diving in with us.
My pleasure.